things make so much more sense when you realize that most popular mainstream entertainment has gone mainstream not due to the artist's talent, but because the elites running society have use for whatever it is that the artist is creating or being used to create in order to shape the people and society to their needs. Charles Giuliani researched J.K. Rowling and the whole, Harry Potter thing, and there are a few holes in the official narrative that indicate that Harry Potter books may very well have been a psy-op. Logically, some of the crap out there that becomes popular, it really makes no sense as to why it would go viral on its own merit, like the Twilight books. But anyway, this presentation is going to show that it doesn't matter how well I learn to write or how good of a story I write. I will never, ever attain the kind of success like J.K. Rowling did. Not even a fraction of it. Because we live in a very rigged world.
As I present these notes, let's keep in mind, I'm not suggesting that everybody who's into Wicca is evil, or even necessarily that Rowling herself is evil. But there's always an agenda higher up the ladder for allowing, if not orchestrating from the start, at least allowing things like this to go mainstream and, enable them to become as popular as they have. There's always some agenda, whether or not the individual participants are involved in that agenda isn't the case. I mean, that's not the concern. It's what those at the top are hoping to accomplish. What Mathis had found with the Harry Potter thing is pretty interesting. Anytime you see something that becomes popular, right off the bat, that really should send a warning flag up. Because, guys, let's face it, in this tribal-controlled world of ours, nothing is going to become, especially as popular as this. I mean, this thing went viral, right? Why? Why was it allowed? It just doesn't work that way in this world. Something doesn't become big and popular and turn people into multimillionaires overnight unless there's some agenda behind it. Again, the person themselves attributed that have the thing attributed to them, it doesn't mean that they're corrupt and they have the agenda. No, necessarily. But it's just not going to happen, guys. It's also not going to happen unless either A, you're corrupt like they are, or B, you're so completely ignorant of their corruption that you're not a problem for them. You're not going to say anything. Or C, that maybe you're not corrupt like they are, but you've already made an agreement that you're going to keep your mouth shut. Especially where there might be an assurance that you're not going to live to see another day if you don't keep your mouth shut. The Harry Potter books and movies are collectively one of the all-time most popular fiction series in history, as well as one of the most profitable, which won J.K. Rowling international fame, of course, and a fortune that could probably sustain her family for the next 10 generations, if not more. Some small countries could probably pay off their national debts with the money that this book and movie series has made. We've been told that she was a simple stay-at-home mother who got an idea one day to write a fantasy novel about a wizard. And the next thing you know, bang, she's all the rage. But is that really how it happened, guys? Let's take a look at how this whole thing actually played out. Let's begin by looking at her publisher, Nigel Nigel Newton's mother was allegedly named Anne St. Aubin. And who is Nigel Newton? He's the founder of Bloomsbury Publishing, the publisher, of course, of J.K. Rowling. Curiously, although he has several online bios, including one at Wikipedia, his mother is not listed. In fact, he has no genealogy listings at all, but his father, Peter, does have a New York Times obituary, and there his first wife is given as Anne St. Aubin, who is said to be the mother of Nigel, and that's curious for several reasons. Number one, no Anne St. Aubin, wife of Peter Newton, comes up in any search. Anne St. Aubin is actually a famous person from history. So what's up with that? She was also known as Anne Arundel, granddaughter of William Arundel of Menadarvey. Anyway, this Arundel family was closely related to the king, King Henry VIII. And Anne St. Aubin was of the Therese clan of Arundels, seated in Newlyn. So the Arundel family is very famous, which is why we have complete genealogies going back, for centuries. Moreover, according to thepeerage.com, there's been no Anne St. Aubin since about 1800. Peerage is the website which, amongst other things, is famous for tracing back the lineage of not only British royalty, but American presidents as well. They're famous for predicting who's going to win a given presidential election based on their connections, their bloodline connections going back to British royalty. I don't know who they predicted this time around. I didn't even see. But it turns out, guys, that every candidate, as they have pointed out over the years, every candidate is connected. I don't know if they made the connection with Trump, but as I pointed out last week, I think a listener had sent me the link. Yeah, it was a listener. He's distant cousins of Hillary. Isn't that interesting? That in and of itself should tell you he's got some tribal bloodline in there at some point. They all do. So what Peerage points out is, and they've been pretty accurate over the years. I don't know, they have something like an 80% accuracy or something. They base it on not which one of the candidates has connections to the royal bloodline, and we know what that means, tribal Jewish bloodline. But they don't base it on which one of the candidates has royal bloodline connection. They base it on which one has more bloodline connection, because they've all had those connections, guys.
I noticed myself that a lot of books will have a subliminal message in them. I discussed one Dean Koontz book called Winter Moon that appears to have been written for no other reason than to subliminally implant the idea in the minds of the readers that rural living is psychologically harmful. Such a subliminal message would be useful toward concepts like UN Agenda 21. There's another Dean Koontz novel called Strangers, which in a roundabout way pushes the idea of abandoning one's culture and happily going along with an agenda of some foreign tribe. In this case, in the story, it was the agenda of aliens from outer space. And, the characters actually do so without actually fully examining that agenda to see if it truly is good for you. You can see how pushing such an idea in a fictional novel would dovetail with the current politics of getting you to embrace multiculturalism and such. So it's not surprising at all that authors really mainstream famous authors might actually get tasked by these elites into writing certain things that act as propaganda that suits the agenda of the elites and or will act as predictive programming. Stephen King wrote a story called Rage about a school shooter, and it was right around the time, or maybe a decade before, school shootings started happening, all the time. And some people will blame Stephen King for introducing the idea into society and somehow, perhaps being the inspiration for school shooters. But you got to think that many school shootings are either faked with no victims, just crisis actors, or when there are real victims, the shooter that's presented in the media is the guilty party will often, just be a patsy, and the FBI and the CIA will be behind the whole scheme. Because if the objective of these elites is to disarm the public, how else would you do it other than to turn the perception of guns into objects of terror? Therefore, you got to use your intelligence agencies to create, mass shootings, of which are fake, and some of which might be real, because, they put the idea out there, and you get copycats, that do commit, genuine mass shootings. But the purpose behind writing a novel like Rage would be to introduce this concept into society's imagination. So, when there is a fake mass shooting, the idea will be implanted into people's minds that this is something that can happen, and therefore should not be questioned as being potentially fake. Stephen King, actually pulled the book out of print. Except, when you do something like that, what actually happens is you get this forbidden fruit effect, where people will actually want it even more, just because, the thing, like, the book is quote unquote forbidden, or they're forbidden from having it, so they'll want it even more. Another thing you got to consider is whether some of these writers are writers at all. I mean, sure, they could have written some works, but once their name is out there, it's possible that some intelligence agents could start writing something in their name and publishing it, basically using the author's name and as a vehicle for propaganda. And of course, if something like this was happening, the writer, it's very unlikely the writer would expose the game, because, he doesn't want to have his career destroyed, if he exposes the secret, because then he would be dropped by the publisher, and no other publisher, might ever take him on. And, so they have to go along and, either write whatever is wanted of them, or perhaps allow intelligence agencies to publish, certain propaganda messages and, subliminal message works in their name. There are a lot of novels nowadays where authors either get co-authors to do the work for them, or it almost looks like it's just a team of people doing the writing. I noticed this with Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Their quality, the quality of their work has dropped off significantly lately, and a lot of plots they put together now are just, not well thought out. It almost makes you think that some college graduates are putting their books together instead of them. The system doesn't want you to think that a novel can be an assembly line, factory-produced thing, that a novel is always art that's created by an artist. But a lot of novels now do look like they're just mass-produced, where it reads almost like they programmed some artificial intelligence to write it, and, had the computer spew out the final product, and then they just put the author's name on it, and the author goes along with it, because, it's all about making money first. It's not about, creating quality art.
The peerage.com website has pointed out that there's been no Anne St. Aubin since about 1800. There's been several of them down through the centuries, but not since 1800. The family is still prominent, the Aubin family, with the writer Edward currently making headlines, but he has no living or recently dead relatives named Anne, A-N-N-E, or Anne, A-N-N. Therefore, we may deduce that a little game is being played on us here with claiming that Rowling's publisher's mother's name was, was Anne Aubin. It appears to be a fake name. Thus, we can probably conclude that Nigel Newton is a front, probably for MI6. That's very often what's going on. I just talked a couple of weeks ago about the CIA being behind, the music industry, a lot of the book publishing industry, dictating, what kind of art is put out there, what kind of books are put out there. And probably that's what's been going on with things like this, guys. Again, you don't get media attention at all, let alone popular media attention, unless you're writing something that they want out there themselves and that they probably have, if not completely controlled, at least infiltrated with things that they wanted included in their books. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just not buying it that this apparently uneducated, housewife single-handedly put these books together. Just not buying it. I'm not saying it's not possible, but highly unlikely, especially with all the fanfare she got. The thing became such an overnight success, almost without exception, especially today, guys, the way the world works. It just doesn't work that way unless the whole thing was prearranged. There's so many people who make it big in the music industry, and then you discover upon close inspection, oh, well, no wonder. Look who their father was. Look who their mother was. There's always connections. Look at Jim Morrison. His dada was big in the Navy, guys, one of the top dogs in the Navy. He oversaw the whole Gulf of Tonkin thing. You look at the Laurel Canyon scene, all the big names. Never mind Jim Morrison. Jesus. Just about every frickin' big name from back in the 60s, early 70s. Can say the same about them. Military/intelligence connections with their parents. They didn't just rise up overnight in a vacuum. And a lot of times their music, not that the music isn't good, but there was an agenda behind it. Whether they as artists personally had that agenda or not, no, they don't need to. Like I said, a lot of times they don't even choose what songs they sing. They're handed to them. Or if they do, their lyrics are altered. Their image is altered. They're told what kind of clothes to wear, what's going to go on the cover of their album, on and on and on and on and on and on, which is why you see this consistent, Kabbalistic occult theme, for example, being pushed by musicians again and again. It's not necessarily the musicians themselves, although sometimes they are into it too, but sometimes they're not. It's just foisted on them. You can bet your sweet ass, though, that Lady Gaga is definitely into this filth. I mean, again, she's been seen partying it up with Abramovich. Abramovich, the little bitch. There you go. There's some poetry for you. There's that one picture, they're standing over a coffin. Oh my God, man. The body inside is all bloodied up. They claim that, it's a prop. Yeah, whatever. Okay, fine. Let's pretend it's a prop. Even if it is a prop, still pretty sick imagery. So I don't think she's one who's have had this stuff foisted on her. She's a willing participant. Although there's also the possibility maybe she can't even help herself. She was MK Ultra from the time she was young, probably, but she does have tribal blood. So how much MK Ultraing is acquired there is required there. Anyway,
You don't produce something like Harry Potter out of a vacuum. You have to be born with an imagination for it, and you have to have that imagination fed and stoked by various other creative works like video games and anime to have your imagination properly massaged. You have to be an avid reader who pays attention to the various formulaic vocabulary words that are used in novels to describe certain things, so you can employ those words yourself. And if this housewife was able to write those books, then there should be a history of her dabbling in writing, where maybe in her childhood or in her teen years she was trying to write something like maybe short stories or whatever. And of course, the quality most likely would have been awful, but still there should be some kind of a trail like that. Yeah, you can't just be an average housewife, then out of a vacuum create Harry Potter. Something out there must have inspired her, if that's the case. Anyway, the tribal-controlled media would never give my James Grider stories any attention. Well, they might have, actually, because there are a few things I write and encourage that the tribe would actually like. For example, James Grider is bipolar and mentally ill. The ultimate edgy teenager. And the books themselves, my James Grider books, they encourage rebellion against the government. Now, the tribe would love to have violent uprisings from small segments of society in rebellion against the government. Why? Well, because that would justify taking away more of everyone's rights. It would justify disarming the public. It would justify greater surveillance. The tribal-controlled media would spin that as a threat of massive domestic terrorism. And the large segment of the public that is asleep right now would be put in fear, and they would go along with whatever program the tribe implements to take away everyone's rights and, go full-on police state for your safety and protection. So if a James Grider story encourages murder and insurrection, well, it's all the better for the tribe. They can then excuse turning America into a full-on police state all that much faster. And I'm not saying that if you sit passively instead and do nothing, it's gonna, prevent the police state from coming to fruition anyway. No, the police state and New World Order are happening whether you like it or not. It's just that if small groups started, committing what they would call acts of terrorism to fight the coming of the New World Order, then the tribe, the elites that control us, they will just have an even greater justification to implement the New World Order all that much sooner. Another thing my book encourages is school shootings. Oh, the tribe would love to have more school shootings. They can't wait to take away guns. School shootings are a tremendous justification to getting people on board with giving up their guns. That way, tyranny can have absolute freedom and not worry about the citizenry shooting back. Legit school shootings are a great addition to all the phony ones that they generate. Of course, if you abstain from committing a mass shooting, It won't prevent them from taking your guns eventually anyway. If there isn't enough legit school shootings, the government will just fake some and throw up patsies. In some of these, fake school shootings, the victims will be fake, crisis actors. In others, real people will die. But regardless, they'll fake some mass shootings and, use those as excuses to go after your guns. Yeah, it's just that legit shootings would help bring it all about sooner. Another thing in my James Grider story is how I'm arguing for the removal of statutory rape laws. Well, the tribe loves sexual degeneracy, so they'd be all for that one. So you see, my James Grider books could be very appealing to the tribe, until that is, the books start pointing out the Jews as the villain. When that happens, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not going anywhere with that, far as any kind of professional publishing goes. The tribe doesn't care if you point at the government as the enemy, or any of their institutions as the enemy. Just don't point out the tribe itself as the enemy. You can point out the tribe's various cults, like the Illuminati and Freemasons. Just don't point out the tribe itself. That's a no-no.
So we do have some link here between the Arundel and the Newton families, and thus Rowling's publisher here. Let's take a look at that link. It's kind of buried, but it is discernible. The Arundel line ended in the middle 1700s, and Therese was taken over by Baronet Acland. His mother was the daughter of Henry Ware of the banking company C. Ware and Company. It's still around today, being the oldest bank in the UK and the fourth oldest in the world. One of its famous elements in the 18th century was Bew Nash. Around 1920, the Wares and Newtons intermarried, with Thomas Ware marrying Daphne Newton. Their son was Alfred Newton Ware. Very interesting. They have the connections there. That's not unusual. Down to the centuries, all these big names at one point or other crossed over. There was a lot of intermarrying with the royal families. The tribe always liked to keep it in the family. Assuming just on this link alone that there is a Newton St. Aubin genealogical connection, this would mean that Anne St. Aubin, far from being Newton's mother, was instead something like his great 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 aunt, or something to that effect. Anyway, Bloomsbury Publishing has a relatively small author list, but we find a George Ware on it. So there's an interesting connection there. He allegedly wrote a 2015 book on Antonio Gramsci. And who was Gramsci? He was the leader of the Communist Party in Italy in the 1920s, who was allegedly jailed by Mussolini in 1926. That's interesting. Anyway, he supposedly died in custody in 1937 at age 46. Leader of the Communist Party. Anyway, before we move on, notice that if either Nigel Newton's mother or distant ancestor, or whatever, really was a St. Aubin, then that would make him related to former kings of England. So there's some interesting ties there. We see this a lot, guys. People who are in the fore, not just in government, but in big business, uh, banking. Not only tribal connections, but we see that they have big, very often royal connections. There's actually not only is Mr. Trump related to Hillary, but he actually has some royal ties. I forget the family name. I think it was Trump, PH at the end instead of Trump. But he's got some royal ties going back several generations. These aren't coincidences. They're not coincidences. These people are hand selected. There's always some connection with, the royal bloodline. Down through the centuries, doesn't matter what country we're talking about, guys. Their hijacking has been thorough. They always make sure they get one of their boys in there. Anyway, let's see here. There's something else that we should be aware of regarding Bloomsbury Publishing. Its chairman is Anthony Salz. You can't get more tribal than that, S-A-L-Z. But he's no ordinary tribe member. Salz was the chairman of the BBC in 2006, having been for several years on the board of governors. He's also a trustee of the trust, which owns, of course, the Guardian newspaper, one of the largest in London. So look how well connected he is. And so you see now this publishing house that really doesn't have a very long list of authors that they've published for. And yet look how big some of their names are. Rowling. How does that happen, guys? Why even sign on with a seemingly small publisher? It's a publisher that's small in size, but big in income. How does that happen? Well, look at some of these connections here. But here's the real clincher. This same individual, Salz, is also executive director of N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited. Executive director. Wow. This is getting a little bit more interesting, isn't it, the more we dig? Curious to find Bloomsbury Publishing connected in this way, wouldn't you say? A Rothschild connection, a very big connection. Executive director. Also curious is the fact that Bloomsbury Publishing was almost brand new when it began working with Rowling. Again, why? Not why so much, but how? How does that happen? Such a small company just happens to take on this woman's work and boom, it becomes this. You don't become a success, guys. You don't get attention unless the tribal controlled media gives you attention. Just like, do you ever go to a club and you hear this guitar player or a singer or whatever that's just absolutely phenomenal, and you wonder how the hell is it that he or she has not made it big, and then if you get to talk to him later, they tell you, oh, I've tried, I put my name out there, but I guess I don't know the right people. Yeah, exactly. And then you hear some of the talent that does make it big, and most people wonder, how the hell does that happen? These people suck. They're not good musicians. They're not good lyricists. Well, there you go. That's how it happens. I'm not saying that, the Harry Potter series isn't well written and, she sucks as an author. No, it's actually, it's a good series. Very creative. But I'm wondering, did she actually write it? Or is she just the ghost, does she have a ghostwriter? She's just the public figure, that they put out there to do the interviews. But I'm sorry, guys. I have a real hard time. I'm not saying it's not possible, but highly unlikely that this woman produced all of these books, all in her onesies. No, no. But again, whether she did or not, how did she become so big? How did she become so popular? Multi-million dollar, magnet, hundreds of millions of dollars. Movie contracts. Sorry, guys, it just doesn't happen unless you're well connected and unless you're doing something they want you to do, or unless they're getting something out of it. And they are. We'll get into that later. But anyway, Bloomsbury Publishing became publicly registered in the UK in 1994, and it was in 1998 that Bloomsbury USA was established. So now within 4 years, it's growing, it's expanding. They take on this big popular writer now. Well, she became popular, as they published her. But how? How? You try starting up, a small publishing house and see what your chances are that you're going to pick up an author that's, really popular. Overnight, it's going to become a big success. And, your company now is going to be a big name with investors. It doesn't work that way, guys. Again, unless you're well connected. Well, we can see the well connectedness. Rothschild connections. How do you establish that? And why are they going to be a part of this unless there's something in it for them? What's in it for them? What are they getting out of this? That's the question you have to ask. The first Harry Potter came out in 1997, so that's just 3 years after this company was founded, and now they've got this major blockbuster hit here. Strange to find, this new publishing house taking on an unknown writer. That's a big chance, guys. A small company. And like I said, though, it's really not that small financially. Small as far as popularity. It wasn't well known at the time. But unless it had that big backing behind it, no small company is going to take on, oh, what's your credentials? Oh, you're a housewife? You know what I'm saying? Sorry, it's just not going to happen. It's too much of a risk. A small company doesn't have the financial resources unless it has big connections, which they obviously did. But small company isn't going to take on an unknown author like that. No. It's a lot of investment that is too risky. Anyway, let's look at Rowling's rather strange bio. It's full of unusual anomalies. According to her mainstream bio on Wikipedia, she has no middle name at all. Her supposed middle initial K, we're told, is simply made up. Well, that's rather, I mean, writers very often use fake names, pen names, so that's not totally out of order, but there's a lot of fake stuff going on with her, so it only makes sense that her name is fake. Both her parents were formerly involved in the military. Now, that's something to be suspicious about right there. How many times have we seen this before? Usually with the music industry, but doesn't matter, guys. Military parents. Well, it's getting more interesting now. Her father later worked as an aircraft engineer for Rolls-Royce, and her mother also worked as a technician there. But military background, doesn't that tell you something right there? What a familiar pattern. Anyway, we'll come back to her bio some more in a minute here, but let's look at an interesting revelation by the Daily Mail in 2012, an article about Rowling appeared in this paper that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In it, Rowling is supposedly reconciling with her father that she had a falling away with earlier on. 9 years earlier, we're told, when, according to the article, she refused to loan him some money when his burger van business hit hard times. Now, wait just a minute here. What the hell is up with that? I'm sorry, guys. I'm just not buying this. This is bizarre. I didn't even know about this until I read the Mathis article. But yeah, that's something very strange right there. What is this multi-millionaire doing with a father who has a burger van business, driving his van around selling burgers? I could see if they had already had a falling out and now she's not having any contact with him, and she's hoarding her wealth to herself, and screw you, Dad, you're on your own because you were a prick. You know, no. We're told that the distance between them arose because she refused to lend him money, seeing that he had this burger business going. Why would she let her father run a burger business at all, scraping and scratching to get by in his obvious later years now, while she's sitting up there high and mighty? I mean, does this make any goddamn sense? We're told that the falling away isn't something that went back to when she was a child. Or, you know, he wasn't abusive or anything. We're not told anything like that. The rift between them resulted from her refusing to give him a loan. He wasn't even asking her to give him money outright. Just give him a loan, and she wouldn't do it. What does that say about her? I mean, this is just so bizarre. But by the way, how could he be so hurting that he would need to have a burger frickin' van when we're told that he was a retired engineer himself who worked for Rolls-Royce? I mean, that doesn't make any sense either, does it? You're going to tell me that, you know, he was struggling running a burger van business? Rolls-Royce, guys, has a pretty handsome retirement program, especially for an engineer. Are you kidding? I mean, seriously, are you frickin', what the hell kind of crap is this? And he couldn't get a regular loan anyway? Why would that create a rift? If she said no, oh, all right, well, no problem. I can just go to the bank, you know, they'll give me, I have good credit. What kind of BS is this? Anyway, let's go back to her bio. As a girl, we're told, Rowling lived in Winterbourne, a suburb of Bristol. Bristol is, of course, a huge defense hub, now housing the Defense Procurement Agency. It was also the home of Bristol Aero Engines, where Rowling's father was said to have once worked, as well as Rolls-Royce. In fact, that company later became Rolls-Royce, as it turns out. Anyway, we're told that Rowling and her family moved to Wales when she was 9 years old. The family lived near Chepstow, which is suspicious because the Maybe Group was also there, building major engineering structures, we're told. Let's move on to talk about Rowling's university days. So apparently she wasn't totally uneducated after all. Although many mainstream sources now say that she graduated from Exeter in 1986, but just a few years back, around 2010, the same sources, Wikipedia, for example, were claiming that she had simply studied there but didn't graduate. That's what they initially said. But now, over the years, they've changed the story because they want you to think that, you know, she's well educated, to try to explain the writing of all these books. They're written by somebody who appears to have had a really good grasp of the English language, not somebody who just attended some classes there.
Funny that I didn't need any to attend any classes to write. What fucked me up for a long time and wasted a lot of my time attempting to write is that I was refusing to plagiarize the language and the vocabulary that's used in novels written by others. I wanted to be completely self-reliant, except my vocabulary sucked, and I had no sense of how to style the writing. Eventually I gave in and just started styling the writing the way it is done in all the novels, and I started plucking vocabulary and styles out of books I read and listen to. Basically, I would just see a word or a descriptor, and I would think, oh, I can use the same in this specific circumstance in my book. For example, if I couldn't think of a word for a certain body language expression, and then I hear it in an existing book, well, now I can just take it and plug it into my book where appropriate. I have even plagiarized passages out of existing books, although that wasn't actually necessary. But you gotta ask yourself, was J.K. Rowling doing this? I think she would have had to. The method I used to become a writer is like becoming a pilot. After watching an actual pilot fly a plane over and over again and observing everything he does in the cockpit, but without any actual instructor instructing you, no one actually explaining to you what every switch and button in the cockpit means. That sounds like a good analogy to how I turned myself into a writer, all about observation and emulation of what I observe. But, without an instructor to critique or edit my emulation. So, does that create a good final product? I don't know. Probably not.
Rowling worked at Amnesty International for a while. Amnesty, of course, is a known front for intelligence, ladies and gentlemen, as well as having worked with major banks and corporate interests in general. And even though, some good, or at least seemingly good, as far as what we're told, has come out of Amnesty over the years, guys, it is, come on, another frickin' front for our little tribal bastards. Just like, the NAACP seems to be good and has done some good over the years, but who runs it and what's their real agenda? But, with all these suspicious things surrounding Rowling, you got to ask, was she simply hired as a front for the Harry Potter project? Is it an intelligence operation designed to, manipulate people to, amongst other things, attract them more into their version of, alternative religion? Again, Wicca, which is really nothing but Kabbalism, studying the Kabbalah. Is that all it is? Just another recruitment tactic to get young kids involved? She did admit later, guys, that that's why she supposedly wrote the Harry Potter series. She's into Wicca herself, and she said she wrote it to recruit young people into Wicca. And, it's possible, if she did in fact write the damn thing, it's possible that she doesn't have any sinister agenda. She thinks Wicca is something good. I doubt it, but it's possible. Okay, but it doesn't matter. How did she become so popular and become a multi-millionaire overnight? Because she wrote something that they want out there. And I'm sure they infiltrated it with a bunch of their own ideas. Here, put this in there. We're not going to publish it if you don't. Oh, okay.
This is why you have to self-publish. Otherwise, they will tell you what to write. For example, this novel, Ground Zero, while it seems as if it caters to 9/11 conspiracy theorists it actually belittles and demeans them. Because the message that this book covertly slips out is that, oh look, how can you take 9/11 conspiracy theories seriously when F. Paul Wilson here could take his ridiculous storyline filled with supernatural content and adapt it into the 9/11 event and make the 9/11 event part of its mythology. So, you see, you can take just about anything and use it as an alternate explanation for 9/11. Therefore, anyone can make up anything. So therefore, it's smarter to just ignore all those conspiracy theories, not look into them, and not give them any credence. Because if F. Paul Wilson can adapt his bullshit story into the 9/11 event, well, anyone can adapt any bullshit story into the 9/11 event. So it's better to just close your eyes and listen to the official narrative. It's very blatantly obvious to me that such subliminal message was that book's intention, to instill that kind of attitude. And the people who fall for this psychological manipulation created by books like this, they end up blocking their own selves from looking into the so-called conspiracy theories and discovering that 90% of them are based on actual evidence, not bullshit fairy tales. But Repairman Jack books are fairy tales, and by adapting a fictional fairy tale to the 9/11 event, you're telling people that, look, all these conspiracy theorists are just fiction tellers, so just ignore them and trust the official narrative. Now, don't you think that F. Paul Wilson could very well have been instructed to write something like this specifically as psychological manipulation to steer readers away from investigating the so-called conspiracy theories for themselves? You see how easily they can manipulate your attitude toward certain things without you realizing it's happening? Because once you tug at that 9/11 thread, you're going to unravel all sorts of other things about our world the tribe doesn't want you to know. For example, you will sometimes read comments on the internet where somebody writes that the Jews are fucking up our world. And a person who is indoctrinated into avoiding any kind of investigation into such claims because they are instilled with shame that it's anti-Semitic or it's just fairy tales made up by crazy people, they'll never take time to actually investigate the claim and see, does this information actually fit with what I see in the world, or does it not fit with what I see going on? But the powers that be, they don't want you doing that. They want you to self-censor out of shame or out of conviction that you'll look like a crazy person if you even dare to look up if there is any veracity to this material. Imagine how shameful it would be if you were caught investigating these crazy claims, is what they have you think. So instead, they want you to let your favorite conservative Jew in the mainstream media explain how things are, and, just be content with that. So you see how clever this book is, in a sense that supposedly it's pandering to conspiracy nuts, when in reality it's actually hurting the truther cause.
If that's the case, if she was hired to be the front for this project, well, what was their agenda? What were they trying to accomplish? Well, let's look at some possible answers to that question. The Harry Potter books sell to the public many of the same degrading concepts that other tribal-controlled intelligence projects sell, including the destruction of the family, believe it or not. You've got the the orphan theme again. I mentioned that last week, how that keeps popping up in movies over and over and over again. And not that if you're an orphan, you're about breaking up the family. No, God damn it, of course not. But the reason they push this so much, guys, they love that theme of the parentless child. Not only because it breaks up the family, that's something that they're big on. That's one of the big themes of the Communist Manifesto. But also, they love parentless kids because they're a much better target for them with their little pedo rings. And so naturally, guys, how is it over and over and over again? Maybe if Rowling did write the series, maybe she wasn't going to have him be an orphan. Nope, you got to put the orphan theme in there. We want that in there. How is it that pops up over and over and over? I look at all the examples I cited last week, and that wasn't even exhaustive. That was just some of the more commonly known ones. It's so pervasive, especially in kid-oriented movies and books, and it's almost like they want kids to be disassociated if they do have parents. They want them to be disassociated from them, to identify with a parentless, very strange. They get kids, guys, to identify with someone like that who's disassociated from the family unit. You see what I'm saying? Someone would say, oh, come on now, you're being too critical. No, I'm not, God damn it. I'm not being critical at all. This is the case over and over and over again, so very many times, and it's been this way for decades on end. Annie, little orphan Annie, look at all this stuff. They want young readers to identify. They don't push stories that have kids, they used to, but certainly not anymore, in more recent decades. No, they don't push stories with kids that have loving parents and that obey their parents and, look up to their parents as role models. No. They want this disassociated thing. They don't even have him getting along with or having respectable relatives that took him in. Parents are dead. Relatives treat him like crap.
I like the idea of an orphan child as a hero as well. Partly, I think it's because the parents would impede the child's ability to be a hero, so it has to be used as a plot device. But yeah, I see this a lot in fiction. In my James and Carmela Grider stories, I purposely made the father absent and the mother someone who is overwhelmed and just doesn't really keep track of her kids. It's a huge theme in anime as well, having a teenager or a child character who is parentless, and instead is being raised by a distant family member who is a guardian, or is being raised by the state. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, Yugi only had a grandpa who was too old to really keep reins on his grandson, so Yugi could go off and engage in activities where he risked his life to prove himself a hero. He had a pharaoh's spirit inside him, who acted as a guardian angel, so to speak. How does that translate into the real world? Well, in the real world, if you are a kid with no parents, either you just listen to the schizophrenic voice inside your head telling you how to deal with life, or you find a role model in the entertainment industry or on the internet or something, and who knows if this role model will be a good person? Many of them are not. Many of them are tribal-controlled gatekeepers of information who are there to provide truth, but it's not the full truth. They are there to keep the tribe out of the picture of this truth. As for Naruto, his parents are dead, and he is being raised by the state, being trained from childhood to become a ninja, which is like, being in the military in their world. He grows up completely under the influence and management of the government. In Bleach, we have a teenager and two younger sisters, where the mother is dead, and the father is this clueless, overwhelmed, checked-out figure who is a crappy parent with too much on his hands. This gives Ichigo the freedom to run around and engage in activities that could kill him, and hang out with a secret society with the parental figure having no clue any of it is going on. In fact, none of the kids' parents in Bleach seem to be present or involved in the lives of their children. As you can see, this theme repeats itself over and over. The message to the kids thus becomes, forget your parents, go off on your own, follow whatever role models that please you, and join secret societies or the government. I personally like the idea of writing about some teenage orphan that walked into some magical labyrinth and was tortured and abused and frightened and degraded in there by various strange monsters.
So, he's kind of a rebel too in the show. The show, in the books, he's a rebel. He doesn't obey the rules. In school, he's always breaking the rules. You're supposed to be in your room at night. He's out sneaking around the school and going out, onto the grounds where it's supposed to be forbidden. Nobody's supposed to go out in the woods, and yet he's out there all the time. But it's good that he's breaking the rules because he's the hero saving the day. Guys, there's manipulations going on here that, most parents would think, oh, it's no big deal. It is a big deal. They go into a fantasy world and they role play and, they want to be Harry Potter. And so they want to emulate the things he does. Harry's a rebel. He doesn't go along with the rules. Harry doesn't identify with adults very well. It's certainly not his parents, some strangers he does. Isn't that interesting? They want kids to identify with strangers, not their parents, not their relatives. They're jerks. And the kids read that and they start thinking, yeah, my dad has said stuff like that to me before, my uncle. And so, you're not going to respect your relatives, your elders anymore. You're going to distance yourselves from them. They're jerks to me, just like Harry's relatives,
I noticed how in all the tribe-produced books and movies, whenever the character is a rebel, and if this character is especially a child or a teenager, they never rebel against anything that's logical to rebel against. They never find some law or rule that doesn't make sense, that is there only for tyranny, and rebel against that. No, their rebellion always consists of actions that are harmful to themselves, and they are always rebelling against things that are there to prevent actual harm to them. In a movie, your average teenage rebel might do drugs as rebellion, or he might have promiscuous, unprotected sex. He might steal a car. He might get in a fight over something stupid. But what about rebelling against actual tyranny? I can understand rebelling against anti-cannabis laws by lighting up a joint. But here is the difference between James Grider in my book, who is a teenage rebel, and your average Hollywood teenage rebel. Like I explained, James Grider rebels against hate speech laws, for example, because hate speech rules are there for censorship of the truth, nothing else. But what do we see in movies and real life in regard to that? You see young people instead rebelling against free speech, because that's how they've been brainwashed. You'll never see a movie with a rebel who is against hate speech rules. No, that'll be the role of a villain that their version of the rebel must take down. James Grider rebelled against statutory rape laws. He rebels against gun control laws. He rebels against surveillance and forensic science. He rebels against laws and regulations that the government would use to enslave us. But in a typical movie, a rebel will instead go and do something stupid, like rob a gas station or something, but will say nothing negative of the anti-gun laws, for example. Same thing with Harry Potter. The Wizarding World system has a lot of irrational rules. For example, one draconian rule is to rip kids away from their family, their parents, their home, and put them in a dorm in a school building that looks oppressive, and then not allow them to leave, not allow them to go home except for the holidays. Now this is something that Harry Potter should be rebelling against if he is a true rebel. What do you mean I have to go to this school because I'm a wizard? Why are kids ripped away from their family and forced to live in some sort of a commune? Why are there rules about keeping magic secret? Why don't the Muggles have a right to know? This is what a real rebel should be rebelling against. But notice how in Harry Potter, none of these questions are ever asked. Every good character has an undying love for the school. No one has a problem with being ripped away from their home. Instead, they rebel by bullying each other, or going to the forest where there are dangerous creatures, or sneaking around the school at night. But no one rebels against the actual tyranny of the system. I remember in The Goblet of Blue Fire, something very irrational happens. The goblet selects Harry to participate in a tournament where he could lose his life. It actually selects him as a second student in the competition, which didn't logically make any sense. Each school had to have only one competitor, but Hogwarts was allowed two, and it's never explained why. It's just the Goblet of Blue Fire, whatever the fuck it is, simply decided so because it's an authority figure, and therefore we must obey, whether it makes sense or not. So where was Harry's rebellion or questioning of that nonsense? No, he is only a rebel when it comes to stupid, childish things. But when there's blatant tyranny in his face, oh, then he is not a rebel. He just goes along like a good pawn. Do you see the blatant agenda here? Do as your government says, or do as Yahweh tells you to do in the Bible. And don't even question it. Like, if you feel like rebelling, then go to a dark, dangerous forest. Put yourself in danger. Rebel against that rule. But don't even think about rebelling against anything blatantly irrational about the system itself. With James Grider, when he commits generic rebel acts, it's because they are triggered in defiance of something genuinely rotten in the system. If Harry was a true rebel and not a little bitch, he would be throwing the Goblet of Blue Fire in the fucking lake and running the hell away from that school. Of course, if he did so, his loving school teachers would have probably killed him for such a dissidence.
When when or if you become famous, guys, doesn't matter if it's in the book publishing industry, book writing industry, or if it's in, the acting world or the music business, doesn't matter. If you become famous, it's not due to an abundance or absence of talent. That has nothing. Talent doesn't enter into it, guys. That has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. It's A, do you kiss their ass, or B, are you willing to go along with what they want to put out there? Are you willing to put in your books and your songs? You're not going to become big in the spotlight like that. Be an overnight success, multi-millions of dollars flowing into your coffers, unless it's in their interests. That's it. That's all there is to it. You might not be in on their little game. You might not be, favoring their agenda. You might not even know that there is an agenda behind them making you famous. But that's how it works. The minute you ever become aware that they have, sinister motives behind what they're doing and pushing your work, and you indicate you don't approve of it, and you want the public to know that you've been manipulated, if in fact that's the case. A lot of times it isn't. They have willing participants, but whatever. On the occasion that you're aware of what's going on and you want people to know, hey, I have no part of it, blah, 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 blah. Your ass is grass. It's good to be, a rebel, the right kind of rebel anyway. But Harry in this series is not breaking arbitrary or unfair rules or corrupt rules. No. He's breaking rules that are designed, for the safety of the students. Don't go into the woods at night, for example, because the woods are filled with all kinds of harmful creatures. Harry does it anyway. You want to teach your kids to be independently minded and not be followers, but leaders. But you also want to teach them to follow rules that make sense, that are for their own good. But that's not the kind of rebel Harry is. Harry breaks the good rules. So you get the message there, what they're teaching kids to do. Break the good rules, break the common sense rules that are designed to protect you and keep you safe. Live dangerously on the edge. That's what Harry Potter is doing.
One thing I've noticed in a lot of movies and books, there is a theme where someone is depicted as a rebel when they are young, but then they become a figure of authority when they are older. And again, they're not a rebel against the irrational parts of the system. No, they're just a nihilistic, I'm going to break all the good rules and be a jerk and harm my own body type of rebel. And what ends up happening is this rebel eventually ends up joining the military or law enforcement. Ever pay attention how in movies they will have a detective or an FBI agent or a soldier start talking about their past when they were young as their backstory, and how they will say that they were always in trouble as kids, they smoked, drank, maybe they even stole a car. Then someone or something gives them direction to join the government, and so they become a law enforcer. And all of a sudden, when they become a cop or a soldier, they're given a gun, they get special privileges, and they start acting like they don't have to take crap from the average people anymore. Now, if someone is a jerk to them, they can arrest them or haul them off to jail. Isn't it amazing how our tyrannical government associates the concept of joining them and augmenting their tyranny machine as being a form of rebellion? Well, you want to be a rebel, become an FBI agent. No, a true rebel should be getting rid of a monstrous thing like the FBI, not joining it. This is the difference in my James Grider novels. He is a rebel, and he would love nothing more than all these bullshit law enforcement agencies destroyed. That's what a real rebel does. But no, they create this propaganda fiction that to join the government, that's the ultimate form of rebellion. It's so sickening. And I'm really starting to believe that these Harry Potter books have played a big role in creating social justice warriors. You had these idiot kids leave their parents and go off to college, and to them the college building was like Hogwarts. And because Harry Potter pushes the agenda of trusting one's teachers and loving one's teachers, trusting them more than your parents, this is the attitude these kids brought along when they went to college. So when Professor Silverstein starts talking about how you don't have to be the gender that you were born, and how white privilege is evil, to these kids, these messages become something like magic spells. By contrast, Harry Potter goes to this school where he suddenly discovers all sorts of unnatural things about the world. That you can wave a wand and turn rabbits into teacups and whatever. And this is what sort of happens in the real world. They start learning that, you can wave a wand and become another gender. And white people, they are like Voldemort. And we, your loving university professors, we want you to fight this battle against white privilege. You see the parallels here? This is why books like this are created, with an agenda in mind. It is why they go viral, because it's engineered that they go viral. If you pay attention to all the novels and movies, they don't deviate from certain ways of looking at the world. The government is never a bad guy in those works of art. Oh sure, there are bad apples depicted in the government, but never the government as a whole is depicted as a bad guy.
That's why, on the one hand, they're giving out or targeting kids, young people with T-shirts that say "obey" on them, but at the same time, they're teaching rebellion. Some people might think, well, what are you saying? They're sending mixed messages. They don't have an agenda. There's two different messages being sent. Oh, no, 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 no. They're doing that on purpose. They want you to rebel against the right people, but to obey the right people too, right as they define it. They want you to rebel against parental authority, but they want you to obey your political leaders and other leaders in society. So Harry is glad to leave his aunt and uncle and go off to his boarding school every school year, where he never sees them. So what we have here is an updated version of Plato's The Republic, or Hilary's It Takes a Village, where children are taken from their parents by the state, divided into classes, and raised to serve the interests of the elders, if you will. Children today are being taught, to look upon their own parents as contemptible muggles, if you will, the term, in Harry Potter's series there, and upon themselves as a superior class of magicians, purebreds, purebloods, who could potentially get, whatever they wish with the proper spell. Anyway, do notice how kids are being taught that people dressed in black robes, here's another very serious negative connotation of this whole thing, that people who dress in black robes are, for the most part anyway, friendly and harmless. So they're getting kids to associate, adult practitioners of magic and occultism as something, again, not only harmless but benevolent, inviting. So, should they become inducted into some pedo ring and see people wearing black robes and a black mask, they'll think, oh, this is Harry Potter. This isn't so bad.
They ultimately want all children to be raised by the state. The elites would love nothing more than to trap kids forever inside the school, where they don't just leave at the end of the day, but they're stuck there. So how would they change people's minds into accepting that kind of thing? Well, they create these Harry Potter books, where this idea that children leave their family for 9 months and live in a government institution is just, some natural thing, that government employees in the form of faculty and school staff are like your new parents. You depict a school set in a dreary, depressing-looking, foreboding castle and make it seem warm and inviting in the story. You depict teachers that look like a bunch of robed, cultish weirdos with stern, forbidding faces, and make it seem that they are people who must be loved and respected, and that they care about you, and they love you in return. So, either Harry Potter was created by intelligence agencies as predictive programming to manipulate society into accepting something evil, or J.K. Rowling unwittingly wrote something that fits with the government agenda, and that's why it was made to go viral. Charles Giuliani talks about how the magic in Harry Potter can be compared to what the government does in regards, to how they create phony school shootings or false flag events like 9/11. So they're pulling it off like magicians, and they must do it without exposing this magic to the average citizens. So the average citizens are like the muggles. If a wizard allows a muggle to see magic happening, then the wizard must apply a memory charm to make the muggle forget what they saw. So, likewise, the media applies the memory charm in the form of propaganda and misdirection.